And as I said before, good morning to everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. My name is Michael Medoff, and I work at School Choice Wisconsin as one of the outreach coordinators, and I'm also into the data research area. It's my pleasure today to host this virtual speaking tour with EdChoice. And now I'd like to turn this over to our two presenters, Martin Lueken and Michael McShane.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen here real quickly. Let me just get these display settings to pop up. It's always that like taskbar thing gets in the way of the. Why is this doing this? Well, this is going to load here in a second. I don't know why this is. Oh, there we go. Display settings. All right, Carol, can I get a thumbs up that this is looking the way that it's supposed to? All right. How many PhDs does it take to fire up a PowerPoint presentation? The answer on this call is at minimum 2. I don't know how many have joined us, but anyway, well, look, it's so wonderful to be with our friends from the great state of Wisconsin here. I think both Marty and I have been given talks with and working with the great folks at School Choice Wisconsin for probably longer than either of us would like to admit, because it would age us. But it's been a wonderful partnership, and Wisconsin is just plays such a central role in the history of the school choice movement, and so it's really wonderful to be here with you all today. Marty and I are going to be talking about, we're going to kind of tag team this presentation today, but we're going to talk about a paper that we wrote with the Manhattan Institute that came out a couple of months ago. So this is kind of like the movie trailer, or maybe the sort of extended cut of the movie trailer. If you want the full paper in all of its gory details with all of the footnotes and all of the stuff, you can just look up Manhattan Institute K-12 Without Borders, us, and you can find it pretty easily. And the paper actually opens with this image. It is from the suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri. And I think when most of us look at this picture, it's sort of unremarkable, right? That the general area that you're looking at in the foreground and in the background looks pretty similar to one another. It's really sort of remarkable in its unremarkableness, that it's just kind of your normal street in a Midwestern town. But one of the things that's interesting is that this is depicted in this picture, which you can't necessarily see, is a border just past those train tracks. But before you can sort of see there the little white barriers on the side of the road as it sort of gets smaller there in the distance. I think that's the River Des Peres, which is sort of generously referred to as a river in this place. It's more of a substantial stream at this point, but that notwithstanding. But somewhere kind of between those two that you can't see here is a border between two school districts. Where this picture is being taken from is called the Rittenauer School District. And what you see just past those, across the other side of that invisible border, is the Ladue School District. So why does this matter? Well, the Ladue School District, and the most recent data that we have from the state of Missouri, 73% of its students scored proficient or better in English language arts, and 71% did so in mathematics. Rittenauer, where this picture is being taken from, it was 34% of students were proficient in English language arts, and only 28% were proficient in math. So this invisible border between two places that are basically, I mean, you can look, for all intents and purposes, kind of identical to one another. If you're just live on one side of those train tracks or the other, can dramatically change the schooling options that are available to you. Now, the funny thing is, this is a bigger map of St. Louis. That little red arrow is the picture that we just showed you, but we could have identified any number of other borders. And that's between all of these different school districts that exist there. If you look kind of on the right-hand side of the map, the city of St. Louis, Missouri is kind of a weird state where they geographically limit charter schools to only basically Kansas City and St. Louis. So actually, if you cross that border, not only is it sort of affecting the traditional public schools you attend, but if you happen to be on the St. Louis side of that, there's dozens of charter schools you could possibly attend. So just on the wrong side of that border or the right side of that border is a swing of any number of schooling options that are there. There are other borders on this map, though. If you look there on the right-hand side, you have the Mississippi River separating the state of Missouri from the state of Illinois. Missouri and Illinois, in terms of government, public policy, are quite different from one another. Now, in this point, there's a river that separates them, but there are other borders in Missouri. You got Iowa and Arkansas and Kansas and all these different borders that exist. And the same thing is true across those borders. And as someone from Kansas City who grew up on State Line Road, you look at one side, you look at the other, not all that different from one another, but can be a meaningful distinction between these two places. And then there are also borders that are not captured on maps. And these are the kind of borders that exist between the different sectors in K-12 education. So littered all across this map are private schools, you have people that are homeschooling, you have all of these different folks that are working. And it turns out that oftentimes trying to cross these borders, whether they are physical borders between school districts, whether it's between states, or whether it's between wanting to move between public school and charter school, or traditional public school and public charter school, public school, private school, can actually be quite onerous for teachers, can be quite onerous for students, and as a result, causes any number of kind of pernicious things that we wanted to think about in this paper of what might happen if we had a schooling system with more permeable borders or fewer borders. So why are we talking about this now? Well, while Wisconsin got the ball rolling now, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago now, with respect to things like private school choice, the rest of the country is catching up, and I hate to say it, but perhaps in some places surpassing the great state of Wisconsin, because we've seen just this year a huge amount of growth in the number of states passing massive universal or near universal education savings account, private school choice programs. And again, this is just looking on like the private school choice side. We have examples from obviously still in the charter school sector, states doing any number of things to try and promote charter schools, and things in the traditional public sector like open enrollment laws, course access programs that create some flexibility within the school day for students to go outside of their sort of typical classes that would be available to them. So this is a time in which a lot of these borders are becoming a bit more porous. Bit of opportunities are taking place for people to be able to move more easily between these various sectors. And so we think it's important to really think through what this might look like. Right now, to sort of identify what some of the problems are and think about ways that we could solve them and what might happen when we did that. Now, we want to be careful here, though. Many of you on this call might be familiar with the sort of philosopher, theologian, novelist, G.K. Chesterton. He is famous for many things, but one of the things that he offered was this kind of admonition that's become known as Chesterton's fence. What he said was, if you ever happen upon a fence in a field, don't tear it down until you know why it was put there in the first place. So Marty and I think both want to be clear. We are not like wild-eyed radicals. We're not saying in this paper that we want to get rid of school districts or that we want to like eliminate state borders and live in some big hippy-dippy utopia or something. That's not what we're talking about in this. What we're really trying to understand, though, is what problems are caused by the existing organization of schools and what steps can be taken to fix them. So it's not change for change's sake. It's not some sort of utopian vision, but rather trying to solve problems. And when we talk about those problems, we really try to talk in the paper, and we'll talk about today, about three different stakeholder groups. We have students and families, we have taxpayers or sort of community members, taxpayers, and then finally we have teachers. Now, we spend a fair bit of time on it in the paper, but I think actually today as we're talking, we'll probably spend the least amount of time talking about students. Not because it's not important and not because it's not sort of egregious what is happening here, but mostly because this is relatively well-trod ground, right? Most people, we show you that picture at the beginning of that border between Rittenauer and Ladue, and folks get it. They say, whoa, there's something not right about that. Or it's very clear that that is limiting the opportunities. If you happen to be on the wrong side of one of those borders and you're a school-age child, all of us can sort of understand, oh, wait a second, like that's not good. That it limits the sort of opportunity that's available to you. And I think we can all sort of understand, hey, look, if we send kids to school based on where they live, and we know that where they live is at minimum economically segregated, but unfortunately, in many of these cases with school district borders and others, they track along any number of historical borders that were created for racial segregation, for religious segregation. A lot of these borders don't necessarily have the greatest histories behind them. I think we all kind of understand the negative impact that that could have on students. One slight complication, though, that we do want to add is that while a lot of the time we talk about educational borders and school, residentially assigned schools being a negative thing for low income students, which is true because they don't have the money to live in the schools or live in the catchment areas zoned for higher quality schools. We should say that that system is also not always great for middle and high income people either, right? Because let's say you buy your house, you sort of exercise school choice by mortgage, and you buy your house zoned for a quality school, but quality isn't necessarily like a static thing. Schools change. A new school board gets elected, a new principal gets hired, new policies are put in place, and very quickly, schools can kind of change it. And maybe when you bought the house when your child was 5, when they're 10, the schools aren't what they were before. Well, if that's the case and your child is assigned to a school based on where you live, what's the answer? You got to move. And as I put on here, as anyone who's ever moved knows, moving stinks, right? Having to, just because you don't like the school, having to up sticks and go somewhere else, you got to sell your house, you got to buy a new house. That seems like an incredibly onerous process. And with all sorts of moving parts, pardon the pun, just to try and get your kid to go to a different school. So while so much of the focus, and I think rightfully so, when we think about residential assignments and these borders that exist between school districts, rightly focuses on low-income students and how it freezes them out of opportunities, I think it's still important to think about the impacts that it has to other folks as well. There are lots of reasons why there are serious downsides to that. Now, the second group that we want to think about are taxpayers, community members, maybe people who don't actually have children in school. Marty trained as an economist. I'm more of a political scientist, but he's constitutionally required to use the correct terms for these things. So one of the things we talk about in the paper is the degree to which school quality is capitalized into the value of homes, right? It's tied into what we were just talking about, but basically it's saying, and there's lots of research that's found this, that schools zoned or homes in catchment areas for higher quality schools are increased in value, right? Higher zone for a higher quality school will increase the value of your home. We use some kind of conservative estimates in this. There's a 2011 survey that found, if you change one standard deviation in student test scores, that's about a 4% change in home values. Now, again, that's sort of at the mean. There are other places where this is more stark and that number is much higher. There are other places where it's much lower. Your mileage may vary based on where you live. But even with that sort of conservative estimate, this has something like, $18,000, $19,000, $20,000 of a house's value is tied up in the quality of the schools that are there. Now, sort of taking Chesterton's fence seriously, look, that may not be the worst thing, right? In the sense that we want homeowners to care about their local schools. They have some skin in the game, right? That if the local schools go down the tubes, your home value goes down. That incentivizes people to want to participate in school board elections, to be involved in school, to make sure that they're good. So we should be clear that this isn't a 100% sort of pernicious story. That said, there are probably lots of people that don't want this, right? They would much rather have their school's value be tied, or their home's value be tied into like whether they redid the bathroom or they've done nice landscaping. Yes, it's important to vote in school board elections and others, but ultimately, that's not a super strong check on what goes on in schools. A lot of that is outside of your control as a taxpayer, as a homeowner in the community. So that means some large chunk of your home's value is out of your control. And again, sort of tied to what we were talking about earlier, ultimately, if you're not happy with what the schools are doing and what they're doing to the value of your home, what do you have to do? Move. And I repeat, moving stinks. So there are lots of reasons to think that this residential assignment system of students that thus capitalizes school quality and home values also has serious negative effects for homeowners. So those are our first two groups. That's families, students and families. This is homeowners / taxpayers. And I'm going to hand it over to Marty now to take a look at the third group that we're talking about that's really affected by borders, a sort of different set of borders, but an important one, and that is teachers.
Well, thank you, Mike. So yeah, teachers are also affected by borders. So when it comes to a K-12 education system, and when we think about like what kind of system we want to have for teachers, I think we want a system that allows for this free flow of teachers so that, say, if you're working, if there's an area that has a teacher shortage, then that area can be, then those schools can be staffed by teachers from areas that might have excess labor supply, whether that's from neighboring districts or even from other states. Or perhaps, it could be staffed by teachers from other sectors or other industries as well, private schools, or, from, say, if you have a shortage of math teachers, might make sense to hire an engineer, for example, that knows math really well and can teach it. So as it turns out, teachers can be locked in by pension borders. And so certain groups of teachers can be disadvantaged and placed at risk relative to others. Every state has a retirement system and offers their own retirement plans for public school teachers. In Wisconsin, it's the Wisconsin retirement system. Most teachers are covered by what's known as a final salary defined benefit plan, where 92% of public school teachers have access to those plans, and 85% that have access actually enroll in them. These plans are intentionally designed to reward teachers who work in a system for a full career, and they are designed to disincentivize. So they levy these large penalties, financial penalties, for workers who leave a system early before, that is, they leave before reaching certain eligibility landmarks. Teachers that work in a system for a full career, well, they can count on a secure retirement. But for more mobile teachers, the story, and younger teachers, the story is much different. So why is that? Well, one reason is that benefits accrue in a highly nonlinear, highly non-smooth manner over the course of a teacher's career. And I'm going to show you what that looks like shortly. But these accrual patterns, how benefits accrue over time, that occurs because eligibility requirements for these plans, retirement eligibility requirements, are arbitrary. They're mostly based on age and years of service. And so what happens is that this works to create very strong pull-push incentives to these key eligibility points. They're designed to pull teachers to work up to a certain time, and then they're designed to nudge them out after a certain time. And so by design, these defined benefit plans, they're backloaded in nature. That means that most of the retirement wealth is being accrued at the end of a career. And so at the beginning of a career, it accrues really slowly. And so they're designed to reward stayers and penalize early leavers. Finally, many plans lack portability. That is, if a teacher leaves early, they can receive some small portion of a benefit, or they can get a refund of their contributions, but not the employer contributions. Now, to be clear, Wisconsin's retirement system, they do have a DB plan, a defined benefit plan, but they also have other features, which fortunately adds portability for teachers in Wisconsin. So if a teacher does leave the system, whether it's to move out of state or, whether it's to move, they decide they don't want to teach in a public school, they want to go to a private school or other setting outside the public system, there is some portability built into the system, which leaves these teachers more well off. So what I'm going to show and what I'm going to be talking about actually applies to most of the rest of the US, all right? And it's not necessarily going to apply to Wisconsin teachers. But let's, if you can move to the next slide, please, Mike. So Equitable Institute, they analyzed the retirement security for public employee pension plans, where they looked at how well state-sponsored plans serve short-term teachers, how well they serve medium-term teachers, and how well they serve full career teachers. And of the 63 retirement plans that are offered at the state level, 55 of these plans work very well for teachers who stay in a full career. So that shouldn't be surprising because that's what they're designed to do. But for teachers who stay for 10 to 20 years, only 5 plans, they identified 5 plans serving those members well. And for teachers who stay 10 years or less, just 2 plans work well for those members. And here's why. Next slide. So this chart plots how pension wealth accrues for a representative teacher in Connecticut. We're going to take a look at Connecticut's retirement plan for teachers. So imagine a teacher who leaves a system during a certain year in their career. Well, they're going to receive this pot of money that they will get to live the rest of their retired life on. And what the chart shows is the size of the pot for each year that they leave the system, that they leave. So you see that for some years the pot is 0 or small. Other years it's going to be really big. But teachers in Connecticut, they don't receive a pension until they vest after 10 years. So up to 9 years, they don't receive a pot. In their 10th year, they're going to get a really small pot. And then you'll see that the size of that pot grows slowly early in the career. And then at around mid-career, it's going to start to ramp up. It'll start to ramp up around their 40s. And then once they get into their 50s, then it starts to really grow. And you start to see this really big hill or mountain building up. The sharp jumps, those represent different key requirement eligibility milestones. So for example, a teacher might be eligible for early retirement benefits if they say worked 20 years, or if they stay until their age 25, and those benefits would be reduced. Then some, and a lot of plans offer that type of benefit, early retirement. And then if you stay in, say, till age 60, for example, or if you work 25 or 30 years, then you might be eligible for full retirement benefits or what's called a normal retirement. But this backloading, that's a very common feature. You're going to see that with most defined benefit plans. Now, there are 2 economists, Bob Castrell at the University of Arkansas and Mike Podgorski at St. Louis University. They've studied these retirement and for teachers for decades now. They're 2 of the foremost experts on this. And they showed that on average, the retirement benefit for a teacher who splits a career between 2 pension systems, the value of that benefit in total is worth about half of the benefit that teacher would get if she stayed in a single system for a full career. And this chart shows why. So if a teacher works 30 years in Connecticut, she's going to receive full benefits and a secure retirement. But if he splits the time between 2 systems, they're going to receive 2 pension benefits, but those benefits, when you add them together, they're still going to be much smaller than what that teacher would have gotten for, by staying for a full career. Next slide, please. So this chart shows how much each year of work is worth in terms of retirement benefits and pension wealth. So now imagine you have this big empty bucket, right? And so each year shows that how much pension wealth you're going to be putting into a bucket for different years of work. So in the first 9 years of work, you're not putting anything into the bucket. In the 10th year, you'll put a little bit. So you'll see that some years are worth nothing, some years are worth a little. You'll notice 1 year with that huge spike is worth a lot. And then some years late in their career, is actually negative. Those years take away from the bucket. So for a teacher who enters Connecticut at age 25 and stays for 30 years, in her 30th year, when she turns 55, that 55th year of work is worth $120,000 in pension wealth. And then but you'll notice that the year before and the year after, so the 54th and 56th year of work, for each of those years, she's putting in less than $40,000. So some of you might be wondering, is there something magical about age 55 or about the 30th year of service? And is there something $100,000, let's say, less magical about age 54 or age 56? There's no research that I'm aware of. I'm confident Mike can't point to anything that says that there is something really special about that age, but that's the system that's designed. That's just an arbitrary number that's pulled out, that's pulled out of the air. And then you'll notice that after age 62, pension wealth work turns negative. So you're actually those years of work in the 63rd year, 64th year, you're actually shrinking that pot. So in that sense, these plans are serving as an implicit tax on work, regardless of whether a teacher, is capable and has years to give still to the profession. Some teachers may be very effective at some of these ages. Some teachers may not be effective, or less effective, or not effective at all. But we don't know. And these incentives embedded in these plans certainly are not, they're not considering that at all. All this is indicative of these strong incentives for teachers to stay up to a certain, in a system up to a certain arbitrary point, and just strong incentives to nudge them out, regardless of their effectiveness or life circumstances. So now that we've covered what the problems are for these groups, Mike is going to talk about what can be done for students and for homeowners.
Thanks, Marty. So I hope that we've made the case thus far that there's actually lots of different types of borders that we see in the education system. We're not just talking about necessarily one kind or another. There's lots of them. And so that's a good news, bad news story, right? The bad news is we've got a lot of these borders, and they seem to be negatively affecting students, families, taxpayers, as well as teachers. But the upside of it is that things can be done to try and fix this. I purposefully picked this picture here. This is, for those who've been to Berlin, this is the Brandenburg Gate. And it's important to note that for a non-trivial amount of time, this represented a very serious border, right? This is where Checkpoint Charlie was, between East Berlin and West Berlin, radically different systems on either side of this. But now it's like a tourist attraction. It's more than that. It's a beautiful piece of architecture and history. But borders can go away, right? Borders can be made more permeable. These things can change, and things can get better. I think if you ask folks, would you rather be in the East Berlin of the 70s or the East Berlin, which is now part of the Berlin of 2023? sure I know what they would decide on that one. So what might this look like? So I'm gonna sort of like I did before, I'm gonna talk about policies that we think could probably make this better for students and homeowners. Marty's gonna handle teachers again. And to be honest, if you're on this call and you support School Choice Wisconsin, which you absolutely should, these things are going to look quite familiar for you, right? This is broadly under the umbrella of school choice, right? If you assign kids to school based on where they live, that is a system that doesn't have choice, or at least doesn't have choice for people who can't buy the home that they want to zone for that particular school. Ironically, it is a system that actually probably has quite a bit of school choice, but just not everyone's able to take advantage of it because they can't do it via mortgage. So what are ways to kind of break down some of those borders? Have intra and inter-district open enrollment. So that means within the district where you might have these little borders around the catchment area of traditional public schools, allowing students to cross those borders and attend other schools that they wouldn't be residentially assigned for within their public school district. You have inter-district choice, which allows students to cross district boundaries to attend a school that they would normally be geographically assigned to. You have charter schooling, independently, autonomously operated public schools that can usually draw from a much bigger geographic catchment area. Again, delinking where a student lives from where they go to school. And then finally, you have all manner of private school choice programs. I used education savings accounts here because that's what all of these states are passing now. But if you're in Wisconsin, you know things like school vouchers. If you follow this at all, you know tuition tax credits, all of these things that basically expand the set of options that are available to students. So what do we think might happen? Now, obviously in the paper, and again, most of you on this call, Marty and I could do chapter and verse on the research on private school choice, on charter schools, all of those things. Again, and we do it in the paper, relatively well-trod ground. But part of what we were thinking about and sort of talking about some of these things is about things around like inter-district open enrollment, because a lot of what gets tied into this when people offer these types of solutions is a real kind of scaremongering that if you allow students to do this, here is the parade of horribles that will happen. And one of the biggest ones is that, if you allow for something like open enrollment where kids can cross boundaries, the quote unquote good school districts will be negatively affected by this because students from other districts will all want to flock there. It'll bring down the quality, whatever. Like you've heard these stories a lot. Now, what's interesting is that normally when we give this talk, I spend a bit of time talking about this school district here. Arizona has pretty wide sweeping open enrollment laws. If you think of the kind of hoity-toityest school district in Arizona, you'd be hard pressed to find one more so than Scottsdale. Some of you maybe have gone on vacation there. It's a lovely part of the world. It's a wealthy school district in the suburbs of Phoenix, and they have huge participation in the open enrollment program. They let in a huge number of students, something like 3,800 of their 22,000 total students are from other districts coming in. And within their district, something like 5,500 school districts either would do kind of intra-district choice or go to other school districts themselves. So this is an example where you hear some of this scaremongering and it just doesn't appear to be true. But what I wanted to highlight was something that will be unique to this presentation, that was something I will remember because I spent this morning, I got my start eons ago when I was in graduate school helping do some of the early evaluations of the Milwaukee voucher program. I was at the University of Arkansas. Marty and I are actually both graduates of the University of Arkansas. I was Pat Wolf's graduate assistant. We did a bunch of that stuff with John Whitty and others from the University of Wisconsin. And I was remembering, I'm like, oh, we're giving this talk in Wisconsin today. Don't they have open enrollment, right? Maybe we know something. So I did a little bit of Googling and I found something that I think that you folks from Wisconsin should actually be quite proud of, because it's not something you see in a lot of other states. Yes, Wisconsin has open enrollment, and what I'm calling the sort of Wisconsin special here as Wisconsin as Summerfest and cheese hats is this really interesting report that your Department of Public Instruction puts out every year. If you're curious about what's going on with open enrollment in Wisconsin, I thought this report was actually really great. It breaks down every school district in the state, how many students are leaving, how many students are entering. It breaks down if school districts, how many applications they got, how many applications they denied. It actually lists all of the reasons that they can deny people, and districts have to count up, how many were denied based on all of these different reasons. And so I think it actually, if you're curious how open enrollment is affecting schools in Wisconsin, you can actually see it yourself. You can go onto the DPI's website and check it out. I thought it was a really interesting report. You can see what districts send. They have this really interesting table that does the sort of net calculations, which is like how many students you get in, how many students leave, and sort of what do you end up in the green or the red of getting more students or more students leaving. And some of the school districts, I wish I knew Wisconsin better, because some of the school districts you might surmise send more students or receive more students, and some were districts that I hadn't necessarily heard of that I was actually on Google Maps. I'm like, I wonder where that district is that took in 1,000 more students than left. So I won't actually do a whole kind of song and dance about open enrollment and the impacts, because this is a report that I think tells it. And you can look in your own community, you can look at your own schools, you can see the degree to which they participate and the degree to which they are net senders or receivers of students, and the sort of impact that's on that. What I do want to talk about, though, and this is something that you hear a lot, not just about from the sort of student level, but you do hear people talking about the impact on homeowners of school choice programs. So if it's true that school quality is capitalized in the value of homes, and basically your home is artificially, the value of it is artificially increased because along with it comes a ticket to this great local public school. If you break down that border through any of the stuff that we've been talking about, won't you see that person's home value go down? Would they not have a vested interest in stopping something like that because their home value would go down? I think that this is actually a serious concern. To be perfectly honest, I think some school choice advocates wave their hands at this way too easily and pretend like it's not a thing. And it is a thing, and it's something that we should think about and that we should talk about. And I would say that, yes, that's absolutely a risk, absolutely something that could happen. If part of the value of your home is this exclusive access to a public school, and that exclusive access goes away, some of that value might go away. Absolutely could be true. But there are two complicating factors that I think are worth thinking about, because that is not the end of the story. The first one is on the kind of capitalization side of the ledger there. And it's important to note, if you take just one kind of step back and look at a slightly more macro, if you care about Ladue-Rittenauer border at the beginning of this story, if we were to say that the Ladue value is artificially high, well, that also means that the Rittenauer value is artificially low, that it's all related to these school values. So the idea would be, okay, it's possible that that Ladue value would come down, but most likely that means the Rittenauer value would go up. So net, when you look at all of that, they all kind of cancel each other out. So from a community level, from a region level, it's not really that we see a class or on balance that we see a set of sort of losers from this. It all kind of comes out in the wash. Now, that is cold comfort if you're the person whose home value went down, right? So I guess we care about the region, we care about the state, but ultimately, I totally understand how people say, well, that's all well and good, but my home just lost 4, 5, 10% of its value, and I'm not happy about that. And that's where the second bit comes in, and it's sort of denoted in this scale that we see here. There's some really interesting work that's starting to be done. There's some folks like Bart Danielson, who's at NC State University, and others who talk about the ways in which school choice policies make areas more attractive for people to move to. And the way that I sort of pitch this is, imagine a big employer wants to open up a new branch or a new office or a new headquarters in whatever, suburban Milwaukee, or in pick your kind of local area. There's sort of two scenarios, right? Imagine the one scenario where the sort of local leaders say, hey, listen, your folks that are all moving in here from all across the country to take advantage of all of the great things that this area has to offer, there's only like 2 or 3 school districts that all of you are going to want to send your kids to. So you're all going to be competing against each other for a limited number of houses in those areas. So yeah, technically the value of your house is going to go up, but you're going to have to pay for it because you're bidding against each other for these limited spots. Your mortgage payments are going to be higher. It's going to be a costly thing. Think of the other story that could be told that says, hey, what's cool about you moving here is that your employees can kind of live wherever they want to. Wherever they choose to live, they can pick based on whatever amenities they like, because they can send their kids to school wherever they want to. They have private options that are available to them. They have public charter schools. They have open enrollment across public school districts. So you can live because you like how close you are to shopping or to nature or whatever. And you're not all immediately competing across the same metric, which is school quality. Bigger houses, smaller houses, again, less traffic, more traffic, all of those things that factor into a home's value, those start to become the things that actually matter. And what Bart's research and others have shown is that this can be a kind of rising tide that raises all of the boats. That even though there may be some loss due to this one particular, change of you not having access to this public school, you will still see a rise because this whole area just became more desirable because of all of these options that are made available if you live there. So I think it's a story we should take seriously, but a story that's much more complicated than it's always talked about, and really has the potential for leading to big increases in home values and actually interesting kind of competition across states for attracting a lot of business industry. One of the perks that you can offer is something like school choice. So I've done students and families. I've now talked about homeowners. Marty is going to bring it home talking about teachers.
All right. Well, so we've talked about some of the issues with teacher boarders and some of the wedges that are placed in the labor market, in the teachers' labor market. Pensions are a big one. Now we've seen that school choice is on march across the country. So one of the potential solutions might be, how about having teacher choice? So states could offer choice by offering retirement plans that work well for all teachers, not just for those who are going to who commit themselves to a full career in one systems. And then states can reform the current plans that they have to accomplish this as well, by making them more portable, making their plans more portable. And Wisconsin actually would be a great model for that. The way that Wisconsin does it for their teachers is that they calculate what a benefit is under the defined benefit plan, the traditional plan. But then they also have what's called a money purchase plan, which is like the separate alternative benefit that they will calculate. And so with the money purchase, the value of that benefit is higher in the early years than compared to the traditional plan, and then it's much lower in the later career years. So that could be an option, but I think that that or offering alternative plans that work well for mobile non-full career teachers would be a way to go, and then but ultimately having benefits where they accrue smoothly and removing those arbitrary rules and incentives, that's going to help teachers, I think, make retirement decisions that's not based on financial incentives, but instead, and the timing of those pension spikes, but instead they're going to be making their decisions based on their life circumstances and other, arguably more important factors. Next, please. So having a system that works for all teachers, not just a small minority group of teachers, that's going to make the teaching profession more of just that, a profession. Teachers, I think it's a tragedy that they have a bad reputation, have a bad name, the profession. It's just that they are unfortunately part of a really bad system that I think shines a bad light on them. But this is one thing that you could do to, I think, increase the, professionalize this industry. It will also put teachers on a more secure path to retirement as well. And removing these peculiar incentives that create wedges in the teacher labor market, and making teaching more dynamic so teachers can move freely across borders. I think will help them so that they can make decisions that best fit their circumstances. And then last slide. So we have a system of public education where, if you think you have of two twin students that are in different districts or attendance zones, those students will have access to very different quality schools, or potentially, and therefore they're very different futures. We also have a system where I think of identical homes in different districts. Those homes can fetch very different prices on the housing market. And we have a system, think of two identical teachers who devote the same number of years to teaching, but let's say they make different decisions about where and when they teach. Those decisions can have very strong implications on the level and create different levels of retirement and security for those two teachers. As Mike mentioned, there's this large body of research that suggests that choice, and therefore making borders more permeable, that research suggests that making these borders more permeable is going to lead to outcomes such as better integration in schools, as well as better outcomes for students, families, and communities. So I think the question is, can universal ESAs and other educational reforms, can they reverse some of the effects that borders have had historically on students, homeowners, and teachers? So with that, we finish our presentation. I think we can move into Q&A. So thank you for listening.
Marty and Mike, there is a question out there if you want to look in the chat from Jennifer.
Yes, I saw that. That's a fantastic question. I'm going to stop screen sharing so I can see it on the side and answer it at the same time. So Wisconsin is not alone in dealing with population declines. And even if it's on balance, even states that have growing populations on balance will see areas of population decline, and lots of rural areas where there's talk of consolidating school districts and others. And I don't know if there's some state has figured out a good way to consolidate school districts. I have yet to encounter it. Someone can send it my way if you found it. It seems like in so many places it's bad kind of any way you look at it. It's sort of traumatic for the people that are involved in it. A lot of the schools kind of figure out ways around the intention of the law and don't really streamline anything. And so cost savings don't necessarily happen. So increasingly, I don't think that that's necessarily a policy that states want or should want to pursue. I think what's sort of rightly identified in here is that there are ways in which school choice can really help this. One policy that I think I touched on really briefly, but it's something that's worth thinking about, are these course choice or course access programs. I'm not sure the degree, I'm not sure if Wisconsin has one of these. I know a handful of states do. And basically the way that they work is that students have flexibility. These are traditional public school students within their school day to take some set of courses from outside providers. So let's say they have like 7 classes in their school day, they can take like 3 of them from outside folks. So it could be from the University of Wisconsin online, it could be at their local community college. There are lots of different ways to do that. To me, that's a way to say to school districts or schools that may be shrinking, saying, listen, you're just not going to have the economies of scale always to be able to offer calculus or physics or foreign languages or others. So don't do it. Farm that out to somebody else. You still have your school, you still have your community, but this is a way that school choice and just like these specific versions of course choice can actually help these schools. There are other parts that were put in there that are put in the chat that I think are other ways of thinking about this, which is like co-locating schools or sort of working other ways to cross these types of boundaries. But one of those things that I think is trying to work with schools, especially rural schools, to identify the needs and problems. Part of it is declining enrollment, but like, what does declining enrollment really mean? Oftentimes it means an inability to provide certain courses and certain experience that students want. And so the answer is like, well, okay, well, what can we do to actually provide those? And sometimes that means going outside of our walls. So it's a sort of way of using school choice. Sure, it's school choice in a more limited fashion than, you know, a universal ESA program or something like that. But I think it's definitely a way to think about solving that problem. Like I said, in Missouri, where I'm from, they passed a law in the last couple of years. And there was some initial resistance to it in various places, but ultimately, like, I think it's actually doing really well right now, and lots of students are taking advantage of it.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, well, I don't see any other questions coming through the chat at the moment, but definitely want to thank you very much, both of you gentlemen, for joining us today and sharing with us your thoughts on this. Super fascinating information, and we just really appreciate your partnership in this whole broader effort of education reform across the country. So thank you, Marty and Michael, for joining us today and offering your thoughts to us. Really appreciate it. And
Awesome.
I
Thanks so much for having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
thank
for
you.
anybody, if you didn't notice, their emails are in the chat if you want to connect with them individually with questions after this is done. With that, thanks for joining us, and everyone have a great afternoon.